darkness surrounds, and it feels like there just may be no other way. There's always going to be a hope revealed.
Hello, I am Traci Phillips. I am an executive and performance coach, and I help business owners and corporate professionals to analyze critically, articulate with strategy, and lead with confidence so they can come out to be the best leaders that they came here to be. And be the servant leaders that they're really created to be. You can reach me at my website, www.theinnatecoach.com, or I'm on social media, on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. I love to have people reach out with feedback, questions. So hopefully I'll hear from you.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Hope Revealed. So happy to have you with us today because we have an incredible person with us by the name of Miss Traci Phillips that you met just a moment ago. And I'm super excited to have her with me because she lives right down the road. She's like 45 minutes down the road. I live in a tiny little town called Fayetteville, North Carolina, home of Fort Bragg, largest military base in the world. And she lives in this giant town, this metropolis of a place. It has like two-story houses. Serious 2-story houses in Pittsboro, North Carolina. Welcome to the show, Traci.
Thanks so much, Matt. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's been great getting to know you, and we're having a good time this morning. And yeah, she lives in a little town, but it's one of those nice little North Carolina towns that when you think about North Carolina, you think in your mind, what would it look like? And that's what Pittsboro is, that kind of a little town. It's like, this is North Carolina. Yeah, it's a beautiful place.
And it's about to change, folks. So if you get a chance to come visit us in the next couple of years, you're probably going to want to do so because it's about to blow up.
Yeah, no doubt. That's the town I'm in is really stretching its arms, and it's moving out into a lot of different places because folks like to move out, where it's more rural, and then eventually it's not that rural anymore.
It's not rural.
No. Well, Traci, you have been doing a lot of things over your lifespan, and you have an opportunity now to do things as in the coaching world, in the professional world with corporate offices, corporate businesses, CEOs of that nature. So tell me a little bit more about what it is that you really do on a day-to-day basis with folks.
Day-to-day basis. So it seems to be more, like you said, more and more these days. But what I really focus on, in the core of, I feel the mission of my life is to help facilitate people coming back home to themselves. So people say, what does that mean? Coming home to oneself. It's that authentic place. The word authenticity, I think, is thrown around quite a lot these days. But, for me, it's that what we were created, by God to be. And oftentimes, we don't think in those terms. We think, what am I here to do? What did I go to school to do? What do my parents want me to do? What does my community want me to do? Right. So although we're not human doers or human beings, we don't really think about this concept of who am I here to be?
Yeah.
And so really helping people, obviously I work in the leadership realm, and it's incredibly important because if you think people are leading others from this place of not knowing who they are, and we look at where we are in today's world too, and it's no surprise because it's kind of this concept of what do we all feel we need to be doing and being from a place of the expectations of others.
So it's really an identity issue. So you're doing a lot of identity coaching, I guess, in that sense. Right?
The identity, and that's what my LinkedIn profile says, is it's really about unique identity. Who am I? And more specifically, digging into those places where we do know. We came into this world as little babies, knowing exactly what we were here for. The only problem is we couldn't speak, right? So we couldn't communicate that. And by the time we could, we've been so indentured and enculturated in the community mind think that we lost it, right? We had these masks that we call identity that piled up on top of our true identity. And so peeling, those false, selves off can be quite a daunting task sometimes, especially when you don't even know that that's what's going on. Right?
Yeah. So how can I'm just thinking here out loud, since we're on a podcast, so identity, that's a big deal. And let's say you're talking to a 50-something-year-old CEO of a business, been doing it for quite a long time. So I'm assuming you're not going in there and in 2 or 3 easy sessions, you've worked through his identity issues and you're moving forward, right?
Not at all. Well, and and I have a unique skill that you and I have talked about. One of the things that I was God gifted with, for the reasons that I was made, to do what I do, is the ability to listen to people's language and pick out the areas of genius right within them, but also the areas that are holding them back. So those belief systems or those ways we've identified our selves, in ways that are not authentic, and that keeps us tethered to a false sense of identity as opposed to what we're really here for, and we wonder why we can't move ahead or it's
Mm.
so hard to move. And so I listen to people. I do that all day long. And as a person who's listening for the patterns within the language, yeah, all I'm doing is kind of mirroring back. This is what I hear you saying. It doesn't line up, right? Over here you said this, it's incongruent with this. Let's look at, there's a reason why it's incongruent. Let's figure that out. Let's unpack that. So yeah, it takes time. And also too, a lot of people say, well, how do you get these leaders to want to dig in, especially the male leaders you work with? They, typically men, kind of hold those, that's why they're good at
Bride, you
poker,
go,
right? They're good
manly
at poker because
man.
they can hold it tight to their chest. And I'm like, well, it's like anybody else, whether you're male or female, you have to be ready for this. I'm not waltzing into people's offices and demanding that they open up to their authentic selves. I think I'd probably be arrested by now if I was trying to
Tracy's
do that.
here. Man up.
Like, you must come home to yourself. Not exactly how it works. So it's the people who have hit those blocks, and realized, God, either the way I've been doing things isn't working anymore, or or the world has shifted. I mean, I hear from a lot of the older generation leaders about millennials, right? The younger generations. You and I talked about this, right? That, I mean, what I try to tell them is, it is what it is. We have to work with what is. We could sit there and admonish, how things are, like, oh God, we've gone down this terrible rabbit hole of not raising our kids to have to work for the, what they earn and that type of thing. Well, today's world is what it is. How do we work with what is? And I think that's the biggest thing, whether you are an older leader, a brand new leader, wherever you are in your developmental process, what is hard for humans is to work with what is. I mean, better than anyone, is like, okay, this is the reality. How do we find the solutions within the reality? Not what would we wish for instead? How can we turn back the clocks? Because we're not doing that. It's
Right.
not possible, nor would we want to, because
Yeah.
progress is moving forward. So it's really creating a mindset that's congruent with the goal set, right? So if people have goals, they want to, create a certain legacy. They want to create, a certain amount of money or whatever value they're trying to create in the world. Is their mindset aligned with the direction they want to take things? And half the time when I unpack it with people, it's not,
Wow.
right?
So, all right. So then let's pause there for a second and camp out. So can you think of, all right, let's say Bob, he's had his business for 27 years and he's got, 13 employees and they all call work home, they live there. It's all nice environment, but Bob's got a few of those issues in his life, right? So what would be something that you would have heard from Bob that doesn't align, and how could you help pull that into alignment? What would be, I mean, in a fake example, I mean, think up something that you've had in your past and kind of put it together into a person, and let's kind of hear what that sounds like a little bit.
Yeah, so I think that is kind of the stereotypical business owner, what you've just described. And a lot of times, what I see is a changing workforce for first of all. I mean, Bob could perhaps, let's just say he is experiencing that, because we could say he's had the same people for the last 20 years, and they, it's family and all that. I mean, that's a whole different dynamic of issue usually, because it is like working with family.
Right, right.
And that has its own, challenges. But let's just say Bob is working with a constantly changing workforce. And what that means is that, the way in which he leads his people, first of all, they're different people, and maybe he sees turnover every couple of years in certain key positions. And so it's not only working with a whole different individual, the workforce is getting younger and younger. not because they're getting younger, but Bob's getting older and older. you know, um, and how we've done things. I hear this from a lot of owners, but that's how I've done it. Like, well, that's fine, but clearly how you've done it isn't working for what is right now. And that's what we could sit here and have a conversation all day long about what worked and how we can try to force fit what worked then into the situation now. But it's going to take willpower. And what I try to explain to people is willpower is a limited resource. It's like with diets. We can only stay on a diet so long because we're utilizing willpower to stay on it. Until it becomes a lifestyle, it's going to take willpower. And willpower, on average, people like you, probably it's extended longer, but the typical person is
you
about
can run out of energy. It takes
3 months.
You have to
3 months.
You have to recharge the batteries. It doesn't mean that you lose forever, but you have to recharge. And that process is not a pleasant process.
Well, it's not sustainable,
No.
And when I'm working with clients, it's not about status quo. That's not what I'm here to do. I'm here like, what is best case scenario, not as just what's okay and what's good enough, but if we're looking to create a system, I want it to be sustainable. So we're only looking at the sustainable options,
right?
So working with it's to say, what I try to get Bob to understand as a business owner is, what is the outcome you're shooting for? Let's first create that vision of what you want it to look like. And then we'll work backwards, right? And we'll break it down into individual, personalities, individual relationships that you have with each of your employees. Because that, and that's on the smaller scale. On the larger scale, we have, of course, different dynamics. But in general, a lot of people think that, it is good to be present. They're like, well, I just need to put out the fires that are in front of me. It's like, I get that. But the reason you're probably putting out fire after fire after fire, year after year after year, is that you never did set that vision in place. It would be like me saying, okay, I want to head to Durham and not have an actual address, but have an idea of where I want to get and just hope that I'm going to stumble upon it. It's going to take me much longer, if at all, even if I get there.
Right.
But if I have an actual address that I can put into my GPS, the likelihood of me getting there is very high. So that's the one thing, is that we create that. And it's not just goals. Everybody focuses on goals. What are your goals? I believe there's two things we get to look at, but goals come second to the first, which is intentions, right? The difference for me between intention and goal is intention is, who do I want to be? Goals are what I want to do. And our society is very much like goal driven. So it's like, this is what I have to do. And then that's why we become so confused about who we are, because we shift who we are to incorporate what we want to do, instead of saying,
fit that into that box. You're like, well, wait a minute, that's not really who I am, or what I'm called to do.
Yeah, I mean, when I told you I worked for 3 years as a volunteer at Butner Federal Prison in a men's transformational program, and most of the guys in there were ex-executives. And so I'm like, how'd you get here? And it was that very thing. It's like, well, I had to do this, but then I had to kind of, maybe walk outside of my box of integrity to get it done. I had to kind of be somebody I wouldn't have chosen to be otherwise. I'm like, well, how did that work out for you?
Mr. Jail prisoner number 1574.
Exactly. Not to try to, be rude about the situation, but, again, it is what it is. And, when we really have to take ownership of the fact that where we are right now, we created it. Right? We put ourselves right where we are at this moment. And that is not to be judged. It's to be looked at as what is. Mm-hmm. So it's like, if this isn't making me happy, if there's some aspect of what I've created that is not working for me, I get to unpack that and figure out what it is that I'm doing to create that, right? Who am I being or allowing myself, to be? In other words, I may be stepping out of who I really would be comfortable being if I was really looking at it carefully. And maybe that's a big part of it, I see that with a lot of people who are unhappy in whatever situation. They're like, I am trying to be this for other people. If I was left to my own devices, I don't think I would be being this, mm-hmm. Right? I'm only doing it for others. I'm not doing it for myself.
Well, that's a big deal. I mean, I'm guilty as charged for that in many areas of my life, from my past, and somewhat today. But you can't always do everything for everybody when you've done nothing for yourself. And I think one of the temptations or the thoughts that I would have had in that statement would be that I would have felt selfish, or I would have felt self-seeking by putting me first. And there's really nothing wrong with putting yourself first if you have the right outlook and the right frame, I can put myself first and possibly serve more people than if I don't, and I'm trying to reach everybody. There's a big difference.
You know what I found time and time again in my work is that, we've been so conditioned to worry about being egoic, right? And stepping away from that very thing, stepping away from, we all understand the analogy of when we get on a plane and they tell us, if the pressure changes in the cabin, the oxygen mask comes down, what do you do first? You put on yourself. We all get that concept. Because not only if you don't put it on yourself, not only can you not help others, you become a liability to others, right? Like they have to help you, right? You can't help them, and they have to stop what they're doing to help you. So as to be an asset and not a liability, we have to put that oxygen mask on first. And what I found in my work, in my studies and everything, is that I do believe naturally, unless there's just some total anomaly that's happening in the human system, we all are actually servant based at heart. Like when I studied a lot of things, I was doing a lot of work and interested in narcissism because I met a lot of people early, especially when I was in the federal prison system, people who would be diagnosed typically as narcissistic. And I was really curious as to what bred that. And what happened was they didn't get certain needs met early on. And so it's like, when we couldn't meet our own needs, if we learned through patterning that those needs were not going to be met by anybody, that if they were going to be met, we had to meet them ourselves, then we created this system of then only focusing on that so we could survive. That's what these people essentially have done. And so, but if it had been natural progression, if they had been supported lovingly up to the point where developmentally they then could put on their own oxygen mask and serve from that place of being served, then none of that would have happened. So to me, it's that something that glitch in the system. It's not that these people are evil or bad or want to be totally focused on self. It's that they're stuck in a pattern that happened a long time ago. And if that pattern gets corrected, then they also have the availability to turn out and serve others, right? Over a period of time of therapy and learning different patterns. So really our nature is to want to do that. It's our head that gets in this concept of ego. And when we do serve ourselves and we have more groundedness, and more to give, right? We fill our own tank so that we have more to give others. Then that's what we do. I see it time and again. And it's not from a place of headiness of look at how much I have to give. It's always from this amazing place of humility. I've experienced that in my own life. When I ground myself and really make sure I'm tapped in and I've put my own oxygen mask on, the amount of gratitude I have for what I have to give is it brings me to tears. Like that humility of what God has gifted me with in order to do what I do, it never becomes a head game because it's coming from a self-sustained place.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't just mean from those things here. It's like, I think when we look in, we look up. I go in to go up.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so when we work on doing that, then it absolutely predisposes ourselves to look beyond for that ultimate support, right? So it's like I'm supporting myself through making sure I'm open to, the ultimate support. And so but when we have that feeder system, there is no end to the amount of what we have to give. This idea of limited giving, only when we're cut off from our source, only when we're cut
it's a
off.
lack mentality versus abundance mentality. And
Yeah.
for me, it's one of the things that I talk about in my branding, of course, is that I believe we're called to live an abundant life. And I've had to actually do a whole series on abundance because I think abundance is a misunderstood word in many cases.
Yeah.
And abundance is not, the smallest part of abundance is money. So it's just amazing how that works. But it's so important to understand what those things are. So when you say look in, look up, all that kind of things that you're saying, specifically because you're a follower of Christ and you're grounded in your faith with God. But I love the way you're able to say, I don't mean but, like that's a bad term to say in between God, segueing back into.
And yeah.
That was bad. Sorry, God. I would say to have that and the way you're able to reach people in the business world which is kind of what I'm doing here on LinkedIn as well. I mean, I'm not out there, standing on a soapbox with the Bible and have, start just reading out scriptures and telling people they're going to go to hell. Um, what I do is I try to take the concepts that I've learned and the things that he's shown me and be able to share them with other people. And of course, sometimes people ask questions of like, well, tell me more about that. And we talk about that, but you're able to incorporate the who you are, that's back to identity, who you are into what you're doing with other people. And it seems to be that, well, I mean, you're still working, so it must be doing pretty good.
Yeah, and I find that again, when we serve, and people are really shocked by this statement, but I stand by it each and every time. When we serve ourselves, all else is served. And I don't mean from a place of ego. I mean from a place of putting on the oxygen mask, tapping in and realizing that, we really have to surrender that this isn't about us, right? It's not about
Y'all,
the
right there,
one me.
that right there was worth the price of admission. There you go. Traci said something powerful right there. You've been saying some power all the time. That was tweetable. That's tweetable.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, I mean,
That's good.
it's the core of what we believe, right? And so when we
Yeah.
can state it, when we can comfortably say, look, aside from, I know we're supposed to be, non-religious, non-political, not, the political correct concepts, I think that has really steered us so far away from being who we are. And when it's really not about that, it's about how we do it. It's not about what, right? It's like for so many years of, I think our, main adult years was the political correct movements, and how you're supposed to water down, don't say anything too directly because you may be talking to someone who comes from a different political background or religious background. You don't want to offend. And so many people got afraid to be who they were. They were afraid to offend. We were, again, so conditioned to worry so much about what others thought and less about who we are, that we put these masks on, right? And so now I always say, it's not about who you are, it's about how you choose to approach being that person, right? So own who you are, right? Be that, don't be afraid to speak it, but just recognize how you do that is going to affect others, right? So to your point of knowing your audience, or knowing, being what's the word, reverent, being reverent to the fact that the world at large is a made up of many different types of people who believe in many different types of things.
All right, so what's the difference between reverence and fear? Because here's an example.
Ooh, that's a great question.
Hold on, because that's a good one. Here's the example. I was watching a show last night, and in the show, a gal had come to apply for a position at work. And it was a position of, it was like a warehouse, and they had gardening things and bags of dirt and whatnot and everything. So she was a skinny little, little thing. I mean, she's a small gal, right? So she's sitting at the desk. The guy liked her, and he said, I don't want to offend you. I don't mean any disrespect. And I don't want this to seem sexist, but I don't know how else. I just have to ask you this question. Can you lift that bag over there? And she stood up and she walked over and picked up the bag. It was like a 50-pound bag of dirt or something like that. She goes, yeah. And he goes, okay, thank you. She goes, where do you want me to put it? He says, nowhere. You can put it right back down. He came, sat back down. And I thought, how stupid is this, that we've come to a place in society and work that when somebody's coming to apply for a job, who cares who it is, man, woman, black, white, doesn't matter, that one of the things you have to do is be able to lift something over 50 pounds, right? A lot of times that when I was a kid growing up, they used to have that on an application. Can you lift over 50 pounds? Check wow. Yes, check no, right? But he wanted to ask the woman if she could lift something, but instead he was scared that he was going to offend her because it was a sexist statement, right? So back to my point. That's an example. What's the difference between reverence and fear?
Reverence to me comes from a place of deep respect, in approaching the question of, I think that he could have probably asked that question. I didn't see him ask the question, but just based on your interpretation of it, it was coming from fear. Like, I don't want to offend you. I don't, the language basically shows that. Whereas is that, to just say what it is, I always believed clarity is kindness, right? When you're straight across and clear, it is kind. right? So in this job, it's very important that people are able to pick up something over 50 pounds. Is that something you're capable of? I don't want to assume that you're not, but I have to ask the question without the, I don't want to,
Yeah.
that's the difference, is that there's reverence for the job that needs to get done, but there's also reverence for the person. It's like, I don't want to assume that you can't, but I got to ask this question, because it's a part of the job. I think we just have gotten so squeamish, and especially, and I'm not saying that it's not legitimate because of what we've built up, in our culture of expectation. With men these days, running scares, like every time we turn on the news, some man is going to prison for, some alleged
It's almost
thing
like
that,
you just go to work as a man these days and you don't say anything. You don't talk to anybody. You should have no relationships whatsoever.
I
And
mean,
that's probably
and
sexist too. Who knows? You know what I'm saying? I don't know.
and honestly, I think that's the worst thing, because if we already look, just in my work with men, that has gotten us where we are already. So to go further to that extent, to shut those men down even more when we,
It's
pretty
gone
much
so far
raised
the
them,
other way that it's
to shut.
just as bad as what it was the other side. Now it's a
Right.
different spectrum of bad. It's just we missed it in the middle somewhere where we're supposed to stop. It just didn't.
Well, and I always tell people, if you shut it down, it's not like you shut it away. It just goes underground.
Mm-hmm.
And when things go underground, I'll tell you what, it's not getting better, so it's one of those things that we need to bring it up. We need to not be so squeamish about it. We need to be able to, call a spade a spade. By all means, if somebody is sexually harassing you or saying something inappropriate, call them on it. And if nothing happens, leave the environment, right? Like, we have free will. At the end of the day, people are like, but I need the job. You don't need it that much, right? You
Get
can't sit
another
there
one.
and call foul on one side and stay in the room on the other. That's your responsibility.
Contrary to beliefs, there's many available jobs in the United States of America. Well, here for us in America, there's plenty of jobs available. You just got to find one, pick one.
No job is worth you being degraded. Sorry, and I'm going to say that to male, female, dog, cat, child. It doesn't matter. There is nothing worth you going through degradation. There just isn't, of any kind. And I think that's the biggest problem, is we don't love ourselves first. We're going to put up with, not only in others, but we're also probably going to dish out the types of irreverent behavior that we are not even aware we're doing, right?
Well,
Because
Traci,
we've gotten so
I
accustomed
would
to
say
not
that
working.
I would say that the definition of irreverent behavior has changed. I think that today, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. Here we go.
We're going there.
I can't believe that the young people today, some of the things they consider to be over the line, that weren't, and not because we were stupid and domineering. No, come on, really? Like, I grew up holding the door open for a woman, right? Well, specifically my woman, my wife, but I do it for my daughter. I do it for anybody. See somebody come up behind me, even if it's a guy, it doesn't matter. I don't care if it's a guy or gal, but I like to hold. Some people, I remember one time in my life, I was holding the door open for somebody else, won't say which sex it was, and that person was offended that I opened the door for them.
Mm.
Wow. Really? So that kind of stuff. I'm not talking about, some guy wanting to touch your body or saying he wants to take you out and go do whatever with you. That's obviously crossed the line. I'm talking about innocent stuff that got turned into, now it's bad stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's a lot of that goes on both sides of the spectrum, male and female. It's like women can do things can do that, project stuff towards men, and men projecting stuff towards women happens both sides of the spectrum. I know for sure.
Well, you just said it. You just said the word. We're projecting. Right. So we're working out our own issues, whatever those are. And everybody's always working out issues. We have collective issues, and then we have individual issues. And those are always a microcosm to the macrocosm. So usually they're one and the same, to some degree. But, as we're going through these shifts and changes, and like, who are we? Because we're working out our own collective identity. Who are we collectively? As a world population, as a nation population, as a family dynamic population. Who are we? And so, this idea of identity is always an important one, and constantly re-evolving. Constantly. People's like, well, when am I going to get there and get, like, there is no there. Like, there's no getting there and then like, what are you going to do? Like rock your way into death? Like, I mean, it's, there is no there. It's constant. So the more flexible we can get and realizing that what is always going to look different. What is right now as we're talking is going to be different 5 minutes from now. Right. And so if we get out of this idea, this concept of it has to look a certain way, like, I think that's the thing too, is people are so afraid to be who they are because it needed to look a certain way. And now we're breaking that can of worms open. And so now, like, my daughter is incredibly offended in her generation. So she's almost 13. You even say anything that smacks to the slightest degree of trying to put someone into a category, she has a fit. She does not like boxes. Her generation is like, it doesn't matter if that person doesn't know what their affiliation is with gender, with with political, with it. You can't put them in a box. You can't label them. That's not right. You just can't label them. And so now we're being forced by the younger generations, and where we've spent centuries understanding how to work with things by labeling them, right? And so we're like, oh, how do we know what to do with it until we define what it is and put it in this box and say, okay, you're going to go over here. How do we organize? How do we do that? And these generations are like totally throwing a wrench in that. And I'm not saying either way is right or wrong. There is no right or wrong. It simply is what it is. And we get to say, okay, that is coming in for a reason. We have we collectively from up high, are going through lessons and are going through this growth that if we try to keep putting the label of what was on it, that's what hurts. That's what keeps us stuck. This idea of somebody projecting on you that you holding the door was somehow keeping them, it's almost like the slavery thing. It's like,
Yeah.
I can hold the door myself. It's like, well, I didn't say you couldn't. This is a gift. I mean, because I'm giving you flowers doesn't mean I'm saying you can't get your own.
Right.
I just want to give you this gift of flowers, and it's how you're choosing to take it. It's the story you're giving it, and that's fine. I just want you to know that wasn't the story I was delivering it through. And so the communication is important because things were constantly changing. So I always say it's not about the right answer and how we're going to, the one way to handle this. It's that how are we going to learn to communicate with one another from a place of neutrality so that we're not constantly acting or reacting to our triggers. We're not reacting. We're not being reactionary. We're actually being good listeners, regardless of whether we like what we're hearing, agree with what we're hearing, and even go along with what we're hearing, right? We can accept what is without, going along with it. And I think when I tell people, we have these situations, it's like, okay, I want you to come together and we're going to just hear each other out. Your job is simply to understand where the other person's coming from. You don't have to like it. You don't have to agree with it. You don't have to get along with it. You just need to try to work to understand, right? Put yourself in their shoes. Even if it's just temporarily. That's all. That's the only job you have. Both sides, right? Is to be reverent and respectful of each other as human beings and to try to understand where the other person's coming from. That's it. And I think if we can learn to do that, all of our relationships, whether it's in jobs, whether it's in marriages, whether it's in families, whether it's just the person, sitting across from me at the coffee shop, who is doing something that is triggering me in some way. If I cannot give my story to their life, if I can say, okay, this is the story I'm reading this through, but if I were to look at it holistically from a point of view of neutrality and not knowing, what could I pick up from that situation? Could I maybe understand that that person is acting in this particular way because something just happened? What if I trusted? I know Brene Brown's husband said, I choose to believe that everybody's doing their best. And when Brene was like, well, how do you know that? Because I don't know that, but it makes me feel better thinking it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and that comes right back to the projection you were talking about a moment ago. So powerful. I think about one of the first things you said when we started the show about a baby who comes to the world and they've got it, everything's good to go, and then all of a sudden we start having to take on all these things. I mean, baby has a couple of responsibilities. Well, 3: eat, poop, pee, repeat. Eat poopy. I mean, what do babies do for us? Really nothing. We do everything for them, right? It doesn't come until a little bit later on that baby has to start growing up. And then what is that baby growing up into? And that's a lot of times, mostly, the large percent of it is what is our surrounding, you know?
Yeah.
So,
Well, our system of doing, right? Like you and I, we came from a generation where when we came out of the womb, and as we were developing, we were taught you're not valuable until you do something valuable, right? So, you could dangle the carrots in front of us and we're like, like the Pavlovian dogs, and trying to chase that thing because that's where we can have value. If I do that, if I can reach that carrot, then I've done something to prove that I've done something valuable. Therefore, I'm valuable, right? That's how we've identified ourselves, through our doings. These kids these days, they know they're valuable, but the thing is they're bumping up against these systems that are built on this concept of doing to be. And they're coming and going like a baby, like all the baby, what you just described, eating, pooping, peeing, and sleeping, right? That would be the other thing I would say they do,
yeah.
is being. That they're just being, right? They're not doing they're doing from a place of being. But then eventually they're taught, well, these kids, because the changes that went on, they kept this understanding of being valuable, right? So when they walk into a job, for example, it's like, I want a certain amount of money because not only do I know I'm valuable, that because I'm valuable, or because I have value, I'm valuable. The problem is they got to remember that they also have to be valued. Like your environment needs to know your value. And it's not that you have to perform to do that. You get to be who you are. But if you don't know who you are, how is that person supposed to know who you are? In other words, see that you're valued. And so your job is to define that. So these kids that are just like, I think it's great that they know they're valuable. But the problem is they have to know how they're valuable.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what they don't know. So they're coming in demanding the other side know it. It's almost like those couples. It's like, but you didn't know. I can't read your mind.
Right.
Like you never told me. Maybe we lived together for 25 years, but I still am not a mind reader. It's your job to inform others of where that value is valuable. Where you can value me. I'm going to show you exactly where you can value me. In this system. They need to learn that. They don't need to learn to jump through hoops like we did. They don't need to learn that what they do is their identity and is their value, right? They've got it right. And we can learn a lot from that. But what we can teach them is that, guess what? You may not have to earn your value through what you do, but you do need to define your value so that your environment can value you.
Right.
Right. And I think those are the conversations that, I want to see more and more of, in work environments, in home environments, and all of that, is that, the reverence piece is, I already recognize you have value, because if you didn't, you wouldn't be here. Right. So just from that premise alone, I understand your value. Those of you and I, we can see people's value. Right. So it's not a long stretch, but the reason we can see it is because we first believed it. We first trusted it. We first gave in to the principles of what we were raised with, which is each person is valuable,
Right.
to some degree. And so if we can lead with that and then say, all right, however, there is this dynamic going on that we get to unpack, but we get to do it from a place of valuing from a human perspective. This whole idea of like, okay, that triggered you. That's not whatever that is, that's not mine. That's that person's, whatever they're working through. And I can be neutral to that. And being neutral also means I don't feel the pain of their projection, but I also don't need to deal with it, right? I don't need to make it better.
Right.
I don't have to feel bad for it, but I also don't need to make it better, right? That's on you. And to be able to speak to that, kind of like we were saying about not being afraid of, if I'm Christian, to be able to come from that platform, if I believe in God, to be able to come from that platform, and also at the same time do it in such a way that I'm reverently not offending other people, right? That is what I feel is really what we're here to do. We're here to figure out how to be who we are as sovereign beings, whatever that means, and at the same time interact and be connected with the rest of the world, right? It's not about trying to get, the Republicans and the Democrats to like,
To
cross.
like each other. Yeah, it's not
Yeah.
gonna
Yeah. No, it's like, actually you're supposed to be different. And it's in the integration of what each side brings that is the solution.
Mhm.
And so, I feel like where I've been really bumped down to levels of humility that, are good for all, good for me, good for all of us, been from people who have spoken truth, who've been clear and kind, said, this is I mean, for whatever it's worth, here's some feedback if you're open to it. And did it feel good at the time? It did not feel comfortable, but was it true? It felt true. Right. And I think when we're clear and kind, it will come across as a truth that the other person can't deny.
Mhm.
And even if it's not their truth, they will know it's our truth and they can respect us. They can at least respect that truth as being ours.
Yeah. Oh, that's
Right.
so good. There have been so many great little nuggets you've given today. And obviously, the show is called Hope Revealed. And typically, we dig into something like a dark moment in your life and we move into that. But however, in this episode today, I think that we've exposed a lot of areas in life in general that can seem unclear, can seem dark, can seem like we don't have the obvious answer how to get to the other side of that thing. And you've shared quite a few examples there. But let's say that Bob's listening right now, right? Or Sally, right?
Mhm.
And they are in that position where they just started with you. They've been listening to this program so far, and they're like, "That's great. How in the world do I start working on that, Traci? I don't live near you or anything like that, and I've got a busy life. I don't have time for. I mean, I just barely had enough time to listen to this podcast today. So, what's some beginning steps for somebody like that?
That's a good question. Well, I always believe that we don't have time, we make time, and we make time for the things that are important. All right. So if we go from the oxygen mask analogy, if this is something that feeds you and nourishes you to be your best self, then you get to make time for it. Right. And to that point, I always believe, like in marriage, like in dating, and then eventually marriage, you have to be able to spend time and recognize I trust my gut and I trust other people's guts. And so you don't really know if that person's a good fit for you unless you have some time with them. So I do give complimentary, first sessions. I call it this discovery calls, right? Where if I can, and I'm really looking to bring my skill set to the table. I'm not looking to try to sign, everybody up who I speak to. I mean, if they choose to work with me, that's totally up to them. But I would say start with a complimentary call, because at the very least, whatever you want to bring to that conversation, if I can bring my skill set and say, okay, this is what I hear. Maybe you want to look at it from this, angle. Perhaps you want to reach out to this resource. What if I can offer anything to that person? And even if they take it away and I never talk to them again, it's something that helps them in that moment, then that's what I'm here to do. Right. So I'd say, if you're curious, if this has resonated with you, if you want to start making time for the things that you really need to unpack for yourself to be the best person you can be, leader or otherwise, just reach out to me. I mean, people can get me through my website, theinnatecoach.com. There's a contact Traci section, and get started that way, because that's what I'm here to do. Is like you, here to provide myself as a resource. I was given gifts, and I don't believe that they're to be squandered. And so, I would just say reach out, like, take the time.
Yeah, no, that's so great. Thank you so much, Traci. And of course, this will be all edited, and you would have just seen her website there popping up underneath her face when she was telling all about it. So yeah, one day I'll get to it and I'll edit all this stuff out. But anyway, it's been so great talking to you. And there were, boy, folks, y'all better hit rewind and go back. And if you didn't already take some notes, you need to. Um, this was really fantastic. And there were some great nuggets you offered to folks. And
Thank you.
besides coaching, you do offer to, like, you do some keynote stuff, right? You could go around and speak and do things of that nature. You're not a half bad talker. So,
Yeah, thank you.
well, they can,
We could always
awesome.
work on it more. But yeah, I love mostly because I love engagement. I think that, when we can bring ourselves, and show up physically, it's a beautiful experience to have. Not only, for others, but for ourselves, really, for us to be able to be in with others. And so I love to do keynotes, but especially things where I can do interactive work. There's that teacher in me that loves to, interact with whoever it is I'm speaking to. So yeah,
Yeah,
I do all sorts of different talks.
and they can find all that stuff on your website, I'm sure,
They
right?
can, yeah, it's under the event section.
That's fantastic. Well, it's been so good, and I'm so excited we had a chance to do this because I just wanted to be able to share you with the world and in my network and places where I can share you, because I just think you have a voice that most definitely needs to be heard. And thank you so much for knowing who you are and living that out on a day-to-day basis, all the way from the metropolis of Pittsburgh, North Carolina.
Thank you, Matt. I'm touched, and right back at you. What we're here to help support one another, and what you're doing, and who you are, and your ability to show up. I mean, I know the last couple of, I mean, I don't know, no, but I mean, I knew you've been through quite a lot just in the last couple of days, and to show up for today, that is the measure of the man, in so many ways. And so I thank you for who you are as well.
Thank you so much for that. It's so good. There you go, folks. As I always say, it doesn't matter if there's a dark moment, there's a place where it seems like you just don't know if things are going to work out. There's always going to be a hope revealed. If you'd like to be a guest on Hope Revealed, feel free to reach out to us here, or you can visit us at mattcrump.tv, where there's always a hope revealed.